Millionaire didn't know he had a child until he saw 7-year-old triplets crying at his one true love's grave. Let me know in the comments where you're watching from. It's always amazing to see. Now, onto the story. The crystal glass shattered against the marble fireplace, shards exploding across Thomas Blackwood's immaculate penthouse. He stood frozen, his hands still extended from the violent throw, breath coming in short bursts as he stared at the amber liquid dripping down the imported stonework. "Damn it all," he whispered, his voice breaking in the cavernous emptiness of his home. 52 stories above Manhattan, Thomas Blackwood had just become the most powerful tech entrepreneur in America. The acquisition papers for Nexus Technologies, his fiercest competitor for over a decade, lay signed and sealed on his desk. The victory had cost him 3 years of relentless work, countless sleepless nights, and strategies that bordered on ruthless. His net worth had officially crossed into the 11-figure range, and he had absolutely no one to share it with. Thomas ran his fingers through his dark hair, now threaded with silver at the temples. At 45, his face still carried the handsome features that had graced numerous business magazine covers. But tonight, deep shadows hollowed his eyes. He loosened his Italian silk tie and moved to the floor-to-ceiling windows that showcased the glittering empire of Manhattan below him. "Sir?" His housekeeper Maria appeared at the doorway, concern etched across her face. "I heard a crash." "Just an accident," Thomas replied without turning. "I'll clean it myself." "The roses are ready by the door," she said softly, understanding in her voice. After 15 years of service, she knew what day it was. White as always, his shoulders tensed visibly. "Thank you, Maria. You can take tomorrow off." When she left, Thomas moved to his bedroom and opened the hidden safe behind a painting of the New York harbor. Inside, nestled among important documents and rare treasures, sat a small velvet box covered in dust. He hadn't opened it in years, but the weight of it in his palm felt heavier than any business contract he'd ever signed. "It would have been 18 years today," he whispered to the empty room, his throat tight with emotion he refused to release. The engagement ring inside, platinum, with an emerald that matched her eyes, had never made it onto Sarah's finger. The proposal he'd planned remained unspoken, erased by her unexpected refusal. And then, 3 months later, permanently silenced by the accident that took her from him. Thomas changed quickly, exchanging his power suit for dark jeans and a cashmere sweater. He checked his reflection in the mirror, a successful man by every measurable standard, hollow behind the eyes in ways no financial statement could capture. Outside, the autumn air carried the first hint of winter. Thomas clutched the bouquet of white roses as he walked through increasingly quiet streets, his mind stubbornly cycling through acquisition details, market projections, expansion plans, anything to avoid thinking about where he was going and why. But as the wrought iron cemetery gates came into view, the memories he'd been suppressing crashed through his mental barriers. Sarah's laugh, the passionate arguments over coffee, the way she'd insisted they volunteer at homeless shelters despite his 80-hour work weeks. "We have to keep our souls intact while chasing success," she'd told him once, her green eyes serious. "Otherwise, what's the point of any of it, Thomas?" The cemetery was silent at dusk, dried leaves crunching beneath his expensive shoes as he navigated the familiar path, left at the ancient oak, past the stone angel, 3rd row from the marble bench. He'd walked it every year on this day since the accident. He rounded the final corner, the practiced control he maintained in boardrooms crumbling with each step. Then he stopped abruptly, nearly dropping the roses. There, at Sarah's grave, were 3 small figures placing colorful handmade cards against her headstone. 3 identical little girls with auburn hair caught in the dying sunlight, each with eyes so vividly green they were visible even from where he stood. Sarah's eyes. Thomas froze, his knuckles white around the bouquet stems. The three little girls, all identical with auburn hair falling in loose curls around heart-shaped faces, hadn't noticed him yet. They appeared to be about 7 years old, each wearing mismatched clothing that had seen better days but looked clean and cared for. "Do you think Mommy can see our cards from heaven?" the smallest one asked, her voice carrying through the cemetery's stillness. "Grandma said she watches over us every day," another replied, carefully adjusting her card against the headstone. Thomas took an involuntary step forward, causing dried leaves to crunch beneath his foot. 3 identical pairs of green eyes, unnervingly familiar green eyes, turned toward him simultaneously. "Are you the man with the roses?" the third girl asked, standing up and brushing dirt from her faded jeans. Thomas couldn't speak. Those eyes, Sarah's eyes, looking back at him from 3 identical faces. His mind raced frantically, calculating possibilities, dates, coincidences that couldn't possibly align, yet somehow did. "I'm Lily," said the girl who had spoken first. "These are my sisters, Charlotte and Sophia." Charlotte, the one who had asked about him, crossed her arms defensively. "Grandma Eleanor said a man with roses might come today. Are you him?" Thomas finally found his voice, though it sounded strange to his ears. "I'm Thomas Blackwood." He gestured awkwardly to the grave. "I knew Sarah." "That was our mommy's name," Sophia said matter-of-factly. "She died when we were babies." The world seemed to tilt beneath Thomas's feet. He glanced at the headstone, confirming what he already knew. This was indeed Sarah's grave, the same one he'd visited faithfully for years. But these children, they couldn't possibly be. "Where is your grandmother now?" he managed to ask, fighting to keep his voice steady. Lily's eyes filled with tears. "She went to heaven too, last week. We're staying with our cousin Marcus now," Charlotte added, her young voice hardening slightly. "But he doesn't like having us around much." Thomas knelt down, placing his roses beside their handmade cards. Up close, the resemblance was even more striking. Sarah's delicate nose, her high cheekbones, even the small dimple that appeared in Lily's cheek when she attempted a sad smile. "How old are you?" he asked, though he already suspected the answer. "We just turned 7, Sophia replied. "Our birthday was last month." 7. Exactly 7 years and 9 months since Sarah had refused his proposal and disappeared from his life. 7 years and 6 months since the accident that took her. "Grandma left us these to give to the Rose Man," Charlotte said suddenly, pulling a worn envelope from her jacket pocket. "Are you him?" Thomas nodded mutely, accepting the envelope. Inside were 3 birth certificates, each bearing his name in the space marked "Father." The world stopped. Thomas stared at the birth certificates, his hands trembling slightly. Each document bore the same impossible truth. Lily, Charlotte, and Sophia Winters, born October 12th, 7 years ago. Mother, Sarah Winters. Father, Thomas Blackwood. "Did you know our mommy?" Lily asked, her green eyes, his mother's eyes, Sarah had always said, watching him intently. Thomas cleared his throat. "Yes, I knew her. We were very close once." "Grandma said you might not know about us," Charlotte said matter-of-factly. "She said Mommy wanted to tell you, but then the accident happened." Thomas's mind raced. Sarah had refused his proposal, disappeared from his life, and never told him she was pregnant with triplets, his daughters. The concept was so overwhelming he could barely process it. "There's a letter, too," Sophia added, pointing to the envelope. Indeed, beneath the birth certificates lay a sealed letter in handwriting he recognized instantly. He slipped it into his pocket. Whatever Sarah had written, it wasn't for public consumption, especially not in front of these children. "These girls, his daughters, who's looking after you now?" he asked, forcing himself to focus on immediate concerns. "Cousin Marcus," Charlotte answered, her voice cooling. "He's our temporary guardian, but he doesn't like kids much. He locks us in our room sometimes," Lily whispered. Sophia nudged her. "We're not supposed to tell strangers that." "But he's not a stranger," Lily protested. "He's the Rose Man Grandma told us about." Thomas felt a surge of protectiveness so fierce it startled him. "Where is Marcus now?" "In the car," Charlotte said, pointing toward the cemetery gates. "He said we had 5 minutes to say goodbye to Mommy." Thomas glanced over and saw a battered sedan waiting by the entrance. He made a split-second decision. "Would you like to get some hot chocolate?" "There's a cafe just outside the cemetery. I'd like to talk with you and your cousin." The girls exchanged glances, having one of those silent conversations that only siblings, especially identical ones, seemed capable of. "We're not supposed to go with strangers," Charlotte said cautiously. "I'm not exactly a stranger," Thomas replied gently. "According to those," he nodded at the birth certificates, "I'm your father." The word felt foreign on his tongue. Father. He had never imagined himself in that role, not since Sarah had rejected his proposal and disappeared. "That's what Grandma said," Sophia confirmed. "She said our real daddy didn't abandon us. He just didn't know about us." Thomas swallowed hard. "She was right, I didn't know. But I do now." "Will you take us away from Cousin Marcus?" Lily asked suddenly, hope brightening her face. The question caught Thomas off guard. His entire life had been transformed in the span of minutes. He had no idea how to care for one child, let alone 3. His penthouse wasn't child-friendly, his career demanded endless hours, and he had exactly 0 experience with parenthood. Yet, looking at their faces, Sarah's delicate features blended with hints of his own, he found himself nodding. "If that's what you want," he said slowly, "I'll do everything in my power to make it happen." Charlotte, clearly the most skeptical of the 3, studied him carefully. "Grandma said you were rich and important, are you?" Despite everything, Thomas felt a small smile form. "Some people think so." "Rich enough to have a swimming pool?" Sophia asked, eyes widening. "We could probably arrange that," he replied, reaching out his hand. "Shall we go meet your cousin?" 3 small hands reached for his, and Thomas Blackwood, tech mogul, ruthless businessman, and apparently father, felt the emptiness in his chest begin to fill with something he hadn't expected. Hope. The cafe, across from the cemetery, was nearly empty, its warm lights a stark contrast to the gathering dusk outside. Thomas sat across from Marcus Wells, a thin man in his 30s with shifty eyes and a perpetual scowl. The triplets occupied a nearby table, sipping hot chocolates topped with whipped cream, occasionally stealing glances at the tense adult conversation. "So you're claiming to be their father now?" Marcus sneered, tapping nervous fingers against his coffee mug. Convenient timing, with Eleanor barely cold in her grave. Thomas kept his voice level, though anger simmered beneath. "I didn't know. They existed until today. I have questions of my own." "Like why Sarah never told you?" Marcus leaned back. "Maybe because she knew what kind of man you really were. Too busy building empires to change diapers." The accusation stung because it carried a grain of truth. Thomas had been consumed by his ambitions when he and Sarah were together. It was partly why she'd rejected his proposal. She'd claimed he wasn't ready for the life she wanted. "What happened to Sarah?" Thomas asked, changing tack. "The girls mentioned an accident, but I only received a brief notification from a lawyer." Marcus shrugged. "Car crash. Happened when the girls were 6 months old. Eleanor raised them after that." "And now, Eleanor's gone too." Thomas glanced at the girls. Sophia was showing her sisters something on a napkin, her animated gestures reminding him painfully of Sarah. "Look," Marcus sighed, dropping his hostile demeanor slightly. I'm not cut out for this guardian stuff. The girls need stability I can't provide. Eleanor's house is being sold to cover her medical debts. If you want to step up now, I won't fight it. The sudden capitulation raised Thomas's suspicions. Just like that, you'd hand them over to someone they just met. You're listed on the birth certificates. Marcus shrugged. Besides, I've got my own problems. Eleanor's neighbor, Mrs. Hudson, has been helping with the girls. Talk to her. She knows more about Sarah's history with you than I do. Thomas observed the man carefully. Where are they staying tonight? My place. It's small, but I want to meet this Mrs. Hudson, Thomas interrupted. Tomorrow. Before Marcus could respond, Lily approached their table, her expression troubled. Sophia doesn't feel good, she whispered. Thomas turned to see Sophia hunched, over slightly, her face pale. When she shifted in her chair, he noticed her wince. What's wrong? Thomas asked gently. Nothing, Marcus answered quickly. She falls a lot. Clumsy kid. Thomas crouched beside Sophia's chair. May I? He asked, gesturing to her arm. After a hesitant nod, he carefully pushed up her sleeve, revealing angry purple bruises in various stages of healing. She fell down the stairs, Marcus explained too loudly. Kids, you know. But Thomas recognized the distinctive finger-shaped marks. His eyes met Sophia's, and the fear he saw there ignited something primal within him. Girls, he said calmly, would you like to see where I live? I have a great view of the city. Charlotte, ever cautious, frowned. Now? But Cousin Marcus has agreed to let you stay with me tonight, Thomas finished, giving Marcus a look that left no room for argument. Haven't you, Marcus? The younger man's eyes darted between Thomas and the exit. I don't think I've already texted my lawyer, Thomas lied smoothly. He's drawing up temporary guardianship papers as we speak. Given those bruises, I'm sure the authorities would be very interested in your childcare methods. Marcus paled. Fine. Take them. But this isn't over, Blackwood. As they left the cafe, Sophia slipped her small hand into Thomas's. Are we really going to your house? She asked quietly. Thomas squeezed her hand gently. Yes, and I promise no one will hurt you there. For the first time in 18 years, Thomas Blackwood had something more important than his empire to protect. Temporary guardianship isn't as straightforward as you seem to think, Thomas. Richard Monahan, Thomas's attorney of 15 years, paced the penthouse living room, legal documents scattered across the coffee table. You can't just decide you're their guardian because you found out you're biologically related. Thomas stood by the windows, watching the triplets explore the penthouse with wide-eyed wonder. They'd spent the night in his guest room, all three, insisting on sharing despite the king-sized bed having ample space. This morning, they'd emerged cautiously, still uncertain of their place in this strange new world. They're my daughters, Richard. Their only other guardian is abusing them. Alleged abuse, Richard corrected, ever the lawyer. And while biological connection helps, the courts will question why a never-married bachelor with no parenting experience should suddenly receive custody over a blood relative. A blood relative who's leaving finger-shaped bruises on a 7-year-old, Thomas countered, his voice hardening. Richard sighed. I understand your anger. But we need to be strategic. The court will appoint a guardian ad litem to represent the girl's interests, and that person will scrutinize you thoroughly. I have nothing to hide. You have a reputation as a ruthless businessman who works 18-hour days. They'll question your motives, suggest you're having a midlife crisis or acting from guilt. Thomas watched as Lily discovered his grand piano, tentatively pressing a key and smiling at the sound. Then we prove them wrong. We'll need character, witnesses, proof you can provide stability and evidence against Marcus. I've arranged a meeting with Eleanor's neighbor, Mrs. Hudson, this afternoon. Thomas nodded. The girls should come too. They trust her. A gentle tug on his sleeve interrupted them. Charlotte stood there, her serious expression nearly comical on her small face. "Mr. Thomas," she began formally, "are we really going to live here now?" Thomas crouched to her level. "Would you like to?" She considered this carefully. "There's no yard. Where would we play?" "There's a park nearby," he offered. "What about school?" she continued, practical even at 7. "Our old school is too far away. There are excellent schools nearby. We'll find the right one for all of you." Charlotte studied him with Sarah's analytical gaze. "Grandma said you didn't know about us because Mommy wanted you to follow your dreams. Are we ruining your dreams now?" The question hit Thomas like a physical blow. Here was the crux of what Sarah had feared, that a family would derail his ambitions. Looking at Charlotte's solemn face, he realized how wrong Sarah had been. "No," he said firmly. "You're not ruining anything. Sometimes dreams change when we learn what's truly important." She nodded, apparently satisfied, and rejoined her sisters at the piano. Thomas turned back to Richard, who was watching the exchange, with raised eyebrows. "Well," the lawyer said, "if you can convince the guardian ad litem as effectively as you just convinced her, we might have a chance." Later that afternoon, in Mrs. Hudson's modest apartment, Thomas learned the truth about Sarah's final months. The elderly woman had kept Eleanor's journal and shared its painful revelations, how Sarah had discovered her pregnancy after refusing Thomas's proposal, how she'd believed he would abandon his company to support her out of obligation, and how she'd planned to tell him once the business was established. "She was going to contact you after their first birthday," Mrs. Hudson explained. "The accident happened 2 weeks before she planned to call you." As the girls played in another room, Mrs. Hudson leaned forward. Eleanor was doing her best, but her health was failing these past 2 years. She was worried about what would happen to them. "That's why she told them about me," Thomas realized. Mrs. Hudson nodded. "She hoped you'd grown into the man Sarah always believed you could be." Looking toward the room where his daughters played, Thomas whispered, "I hope I have too." "You've lost your mind, Thomas." Patricia Winters, BlackTech's CFO and Thomas's right hand for the past decade, paced his office, her heels clicking aggressively on the hardwood floor. "3 children, overnight. The board is already nervous about your commitment to the IPO." Thomas continued reviewing the custody documents his lawyer had sent over. "The board's concerns aren't my priority right now." Patricia stopped abruptly. "Not your priority? We're 6 months from going public. This acquisition doubled our valuation. Investors are watching your every move." "The girls are Sarah's daughters," Thomas said quietly, finally looking up. "And mine." Patricia's expression softened marginally. She'd known about Sarah, about the proposal, about the grief that had driven Thomas to build BlackTech into what it was today. "I understand this is personal," she said, her tone gentler, "but maybe timing is something to consider. Postpone the custody battle until after the IPO. Once we've gone public, I'll have even less time." Thomas cut in. "And they need me now." A knock at the door interrupted them. Thomas's assistant poked her head in. "Sir, they're here." Before Thomas could respond, 3 identical auburn-haired girls streamed into his office, followed by a flustered Mrs. Hudson. "I'm so sorry," the elderly woman apologized. "The school called. Someone forgot to update their emergency contact information, and they had an early dismissal day." "Daddy!" Lily launched herself at Thomas, wrapping small arms around his waist. The term, which they'd started using tentatively that morning, still startled him, but warmth spread through his chest at the sound of it. Patricia's eyebrows shot up at the display. "You must be Patricia," Charlotte said, ever observant. "Daddy has your picture on his organization chart." "You're very pretty." Patricia blinked, clearly caught off guard by the child's directness. "Thank you. And you are?" "I'm Charlotte," That's Lily hugging Daddy, and that's Sophia looking at your fish tank. Indeed, Sophia was pressed against the glass of the aquarium that dominated one wall of Thomas's office, completely absorbed in watching the tropical fish dart between coral formations. "Do you feed them every day?" she asked, without turning around. "My friend Jason had a goldfish, but it died because he forgot to feed it." Thomas saw the exact moment Patricia's expression shifted from professional concern to genuine discomfort with the sudden intrusion of childhood into this corporate space. "Mr. Blackwood has an investor meeting in 20 minutes, she said pointedly. Thomas checked his watch and frowned. The Matsuda Group. Their investment was crucial for the Asian market expansion. "I can take them home," Mrs. Hudson offered, though the fatigue in her eyes was evident. "No, you've done enough today," Thomas said. Then, making a split-second decision, "They'll stay here." Patricia's eyes widened. "Thomas, the Matsuda Group will understand a family emergency," he finished firmly. To his assistant, he added, "Jenny, please set the girls up in the conference room with some drawing supplies, and reschedule Matsuda for tomorrow." Patricia looked as though she might argue further, but instead pressed her lips into a thin line and nodded stiffly. "I'll inform the board of this development." After she left, Mrs. Hudson touched Thomas's arm gently. "That woman doesn't approve of your priorities shifting." Thomas watched through the glass wall as Jenny led the excited triplets toward the conference room, their identical green eyes wide as they passed curious employees. "My priorities needed shifting," he said simply. "I just didn't know it until now." When his phone rang minutes later with the school's principal requesting a parent-teacher conference that afternoon, the very time the Matsuda meeting had been scheduled, Thomas felt no hesitation in agreeing to attend. Some empire building would simply have to wait. The bronze elevator doors to Thomas's penthouse slid open to reveal Marcus Wells leaning against the wall, his posture casual, but his eyes calculating. Thomas stiffened immediately, positioning himself slightly in front of the girls, who had frozen upon seeing their cousin. "Fancy setup you've got here, Blackwood," Marcus drawled, pushing himself upright. "Doorman let me up. Said I was family." "What do you want, Marcus?" Thomas kept his voice level, aware of the girls pressing closer behind him. Marcus's gaze drifted around the expansive entryway, taking in the obvious signs of wealth. "Just checking on my little cousins, making sure they're being properly cared for." "We're fine," Charlotte said firmly, though Thomas felt her hand clutch the back of his jacket. Marcus's smile didn't reach his eyes. "Glad to hear it." He took a step closer to Thomas. "I've been doing some research on you, Mr. Blackwood. Tech billionaire, about to take your company public. Very impressive. Thank you for your concern about the girls. They're doing well." "I'm sure they are." Marcus lowered his voice. "Must be nice, living in a place like this. What would it cost to buy a place nearby? 5 million? 10? The implication couldn't have been clearer. Thomas kept his expression neutral. "If you're interested in real estate, I can recommend a broker." Marcus chuckled. "Let's not waste time. I'm their legal guardian. You want custody? I'm sure we can come to an arrangement that benefits everyone." "You want money," Thomas stated flatly. "Consider it compensation for my emotional distress. I've grown attached to the girls." Thomas felt Sophia trembling against his side. "Girls," he said without taking his eyes off Marcus. "Go to your room. Please, I need to speak with your cousin privately." "But," Lily began. "Now," Thomas said firmly. Once the reluctant girls had disappeared down the hallway, Thomas's demeanor changed instantly. "Let me be perfectly clear. You will not extort me, you will not threaten those children, and you will certainly not be taking them anywhere." Marcus's smirk faltered. "I have legal rights. Rights you've abused," Thomas cut in, his voice deadly. "Quiet. Did you think I wouldn't document Sophia's bruises, or that I wouldn't investigate your gambling debts, or your history of fraud?" The color drained from Marcus's face. "You can't prove anything." "I can, and I will." Thomas took a step forward. "Here's what's going to happen. You're going to leave now. My security team will escort you out. If you attempt to contact the girls again without going through my attorneys, I will ensure that every skeleton in your closet becomes public knowledge." Marcus's expression hardened. "This isn't over, Blackwood. Those girls are my leverage." "Those girls," Thomas replied, "are my daughters. And you've made a grave miscalculation if you think I won't use every resource at my disposal to protect them." After Marcus was escorted out, Thomas leaned against the closed door, adrenaline still coursing through him. He found the girls huddled together in their bedroom, 3 pairs of identical green eyes wide with apprehension. "Is he gone?" Lily asked in a small voice. Thomas nodded, sitting on the edge of their bed. "Yes, and he won't be taking you anywhere." "He's scary when he's angry," Sophia whispered. "That's when he hurts people." Thomas gently took her hand. "No one is going to hurt you again, I promise." "But he's still our guardian," Charlotte pointed out, ever practical. "Legally, not for long," Thomas assured her. "I've already filed for emergency custody." Lily climbed into his lap, her small arms wrapping around his neck. "I want to stay with you forever, Daddy." As the other two joined the embrace, Thomas felt a fierce protectiveness unlike anything he'd experienced before. In just a few days, these 3 little girls had completely transformed his world, and he would move heaven and earth to keep them safe. "Tell me something good, David." Thomas sat in his home office, phone pressed to his ear as he watched the girls building an elaborate pillow fort in the living room. Their laughter, 3 distinct versions of the same musical sound, filled the penthouse with a warmth he'd never known it could contain. David Chen, the private investigator Thomas had hired, cleared his throat. "Marcus Wells is a goldmine of bad decisions, boss. Gambling debts to some unsavory characters in Atlantic City. 2 fraud investigations that were settled quietly. And he's already dipped into the girls' trust fund, the small one their grandmother established." Thomas's grip tightened on the phone. "Can we prove that?" "Bank records don't lie. Eleanor set up accounts for each girl's education. Marcus became signatory after her death and has withdrawn nearly 30,000 already." "Perfect. Send everything to Richard." "There's more," David continued. "I tracked down some of Sarah's old friends. A woman named Melissa Carter was particularly close to her during the pregnancy. She kept emails." Thomas's heart skipped. "What kind of emails?" "Personal ones. Sarah discussing her reasons for not telling you about the pregnancy. Might help establish that she never intended to permanently keep you from your daughters." After ending the call, Thomas opened his laptop to review the steadily growing file his team was building. Emergency custody hearings moved quickly, especially with evidence of abuse, but he needed to be thoroughly prepared. Marcus wouldn't go down without a fight, not with the potential payday he believed was at stake. "Daddy?" Charlotte stood in the doorway, her expression serious. "Can I ask you a question?" "Of course." Thomas closed his laptop and gave her his full attention, something he was learning was crucial with children. She approached his desk cautiously. "My science fair is next week. Will you come?" The simple question carried layers of meaning. This wasn't just about attendance. It was about trust, about believing he wouldn't disappear from their lives as suddenly as he'd appeared. "I wouldn't miss it," he promised. "What's your project about?" Charlotte's face lit up. "Renewable energy. I built a solar-powered water filtration system. Grandma helped me start it before she got sick." Thomas felt a pang of gratitude toward Eleanor, who had nurtured his daughters' minds and hearts for 7 years. "That sounds impressive. The judges are real scientists," she continued, her excitement building. "If I win, I get to go to the regional competition. Then we'd better make sure your project is perfect. Thomas smiled. Would you like some help finishing it? Charlotte studied him, her eyes, so much like Sarah's, seeming to evaluate whether his offer was genuine. You know about science? A bit, Thomas said, deliberately understating his double degrees in engineering and computer science. I might have some useful suggestions. Later that evening, as Thomas helped Charlotte calibrate her solar panels, his phone buzzed repeatedly with urgent messages from Patricia. A major security flaw had been discovered in their latest software release. The board was demanding an emergency meeting. Investors were getting nervous. 6 months ago, Thomas would have dropped everything and rushed to the office, working through the night to contain the damage. Now, looking at Charlotte's concentrated expression as she carefully adjusted her project, he made a different choice. One more calibration and we'll have it, he said, silencing his phone without checking the messages. Charlotte glanced up at him. Is your phone ringing? Nothing that can't wait, Thomas replied, surprised to find he meant it. Hours later, after the girls were asleep, Thomas would return the calls, coordinate the response team, and calm the board's fears, all from his home office. But in this moment, watching his daughter's face light up as her project successfully filtered its first water sample, Thomas Blackwood discovered what Sarah had known all along. Some things were more important than empire building. No. The pink one! That's Lily's chair! Sophia protested, as movers carried furniture into the sprawling Upper East Side brownstone Thomas had purchased the previous week. The historic 5-bedroom home was a radical departure from his minimalist penthouse, but the girls needed space, stability, and, as Charlotte had pointedly reminded him, a yard. Sorry, Thomas told the confused mover, they're very particular about their colors. Indeed, he was learning that despite being identical triplets, his daughters had fiercely individual preferences. Lily gravitated toward all things pink and soft, her gentle nature reflected in her love of music and stories. Charlotte, analytical and precise, preferred blue and had already filled her room with books and science kits. Sophia, the most adventurous, insisted on bright yellow and couldn't sit still for more than 5 minutes unless she was absorbed in building something. Mr. Blackwood, the interior designer approached with fabric swatches. I need final approval on the curtains for the girls' rooms. Before Thomas could respond, Lily appeared at his side. Can I decide for my room, please? The designer's eyebrows rose slightly, but Thomas nodded. Of course, it's your room. As Lily seriously examined fabric options, Thomas wandered through. The house in transition. Workers painted, installed bookshelves, and assembled furniture according to plans that had been rushed through in record time. He'd paid a premium for the speed, determined to create a proper home before the custody hearing next week. He found Charlotte in what would be the library, directing the placement of bookshelves with the authority of a tiny general. The science. Books need to be separate from fiction, she was explaining to a patient worker. And we need a special shelf for Daddy's engineering books. Thomas smiled, still not quite used to the title but warming to it more each day. Charlotte caught sight of him and waved him over. Is this right? She asked, showing him her careful drawing of how the library should be organized. Perfect, he assured her. Very logical system. She beamed at the approval, and Thomas felt that now familiar warmth spread through his chest. Each smile earned from his daughters felt like a precious achievement. Daddy, Sophia's voice echoed from the backyard. Come see. Thomas found her balanced precariously on a tree branch, grinning triumphantly. Look how high I can climb. His heart nearly stopped. Sophia, that's not safe. Please come down. But I'm good at climbing, she protested, inching higher. I'm sure. You are, he said, trying to keep panic from his voice as he approached the tree. But if you fell and got hurt, I'd be very sad. She considered this. Grandma used to say that too. She was right. Smart ladies, your grandmother and mother. At the mention of Sarah, Sophia's expression softened. Carefully, she began climbing. Down. When she reached the lowest branch, Thomas lifted her the rest of the way. "Did you know my mom well?" she asked once her feet touched the ground. The question caught him off guard. "Yes. We were very close for several years." "What was she like?" "We only have a few pictures." Thomas led her to a garden bench. She was remarkable, smart, passionate about helping others. She had a laugh that could fill a room. He smiled at the memory. "And she loved thunderstorms. She used to drag me outside just to feel the rain." Sophia's eyes widened. "I love storms too. Charlotte and Lily get scared, but I think they're exciting." "Just like your mother," Thomas said softly. That evening, after tucking the girls into their new beds in rooms still smelling of fresh paint, Thomas sat on his balcony overlooking the small backyard. His phone buzzed with a message from Richard. Evidence looked strong, hearing set for Tuesday. For the first time in his adult life, Thomas Blackwood's greatest ambition had nothing to do with business success. His empire could crumble tomorrow, and as long as he secured his daughter's future, he would consider himself wealthy beyond measure. Sarah had been right about what truly mattered. He just wished she'd given him the chance to learn it with her. The weekend at Thomas's lake house was meant to be a reprieve before Tuesday's custody hearing, a chance for the girls to relax away from the city and for Thomas to finalize preparations with his legal team. The secluded property in the Adirondacks had always been his personal retreat, a place he visited perhaps twice a year when the demands of black tech became overwhelming. Now, watching his daughters explore the shoreline, skipping stones across the glassy water surface, he wondered why he hadn't spent more time here. "You need to flick your wrist like this," Thomas demonstrated, sending a flat stone bouncing 5 times across the lake's surface. Sophia watched intently, her competitive nature already evident in her furrowed brow. "Let me try again." She grabbed another stone, mimicking his movement. Her stone skipped 3 times before sinking. "I did it! Charlotte, did you see?" Charlotte looked up from the small collection of unusual rocks and shells she was methodically organizing on a fallen log. "Nice job. That's one more than last time." Lily, who had been contentedly making a daisy chain nearby, approached Thomas with her creation. "It's a crown," she explained, standing on tiptoes to place it on his head. "Now you're the king of the lake." Thomas accepted the floral crown with appropriate solemnity, earning a delighted giggle from Lily and eye rolls from her sisters. These distinct personalities emerging from identical faces continued to fascinate him, nature versus nurture playing out before his eyes. "Who wants to learn to fish?" he asked, remembering the tackle equipment stored in the boathouse. His father had taught him to fish on this very lake, one of the few positive memories from a childhood dominated by his father's relentless work ethic and emotional distance. Real fishing, with worms and everything? Sophia's eyes lit up. "Ew." Lily wrinkled her nose. "Do we have to touch the worms?" "I'll help you," Thomas promised, "and we'll release any fish we catch, just for fun." An hour later, they sat along the small dock, 3 identical little girls with fishing rods sized for their small hands. Thomas moved between them, helping to bait hooks, much to Lily's disgust, and untangle lines, most often Sophia's given her impatient casting technique. Charlotte had quickly mastered the basics and sat with perfect posture, her rod held at the precise angle Thomas had demonstrated. "My dad taught me to fish when I was about your age," Thomas shared, helping Lily reposition her grip. "Your dad?" Lily looked up curiously. "We have a grandpa too?" Thomas realized he'd never mentioned his parents. "He passed away a few years ago, before you were born." "Was he nice?" Sophia asked bluntly. Thomas considered how to answer. "He was. Complicated. Very focused on work, like I was before I met you." "Did he play with you?" Lily persisted. Sometimes, fishing was one of the few things we did together. "I have a bite," Charlotte suddenly exclaimed, her rod bending. Thomas helped her reel in a modest-sized bass, all three girls crowding around to admire the catch before Thomas carefully released it back into the lake. That evening, after a dinner of hot dogs and s'mores cooked over the fire pit, Thomas searched through the lakehouse's storage closet for extra blankets. The spring nights were still cool, and Lily had complained of being cold. In the back of the closet, behind winter gear and old life jackets, he found a cardboard box labeled simply, "Dad." He'd packed it away after his father's funeral, unable to face the contents in his grief. Now, driven by a new perspective on fatherhood, Thomas carried the box to the living room and opened it while the girls slept upstairs. Inside were the expected items: his father's watch, cufflinks, a few photographs, and something unexpected: a leather-bound journal. Thomas had never known his father to keep one. Opening it carefully, he found entries spanning the last 5 years of his father's life. The very first entry caught his eye. "Thomas took the company public today. Should have been there, but the deal in Singapore couldn't wait. Biggest regret of my career. Missing my son's moment." Thomas stared at the words, a knot forming in his throat. He'd always assumed his father had prioritized the Singapore deal over his IPO launch. He'd never mentioned disappointment or regret. He turned pages, finding more entries. "Thomas was featured in Business Weekly today. Built something far beyond what I could have imagined. Wish I'd told him I was proud instead of suggesting improvements to his European strategy. Christmas alone again. Thomas invited me to New York, but after our argument about the board position, didn't feel welcome. Pride is a destructive force. Mine has cost me a relationship with my only child." The final entry, dated just weeks before his father's fatal heart attack, hit hardest. "Realized today I sacrificed everything for success. That means nothing without family to share it with. Thomas is making the same mistakes. Pray he finds what matters before it's too late, as I never did." Thomas closed the journal, emotions churning. His father had recognized the same empty success that Thomas himself had felt before finding the girls. And Sarah, she'd feared Thomas would follow the same path as his father, choosing ambition over family. The parallels were painful, but illuminating. Small sound from the doorway startled him. Sophia stood there in pajamas printed with rocket ships, her hair tousled from sleep. "I had a bad dream," she explained. "Thunder was chasing me." Thomas set aside the journal and opened his arms. Sophia climbed into his lap, small and vulnerable in a way she rarely allowed herself to be during waking hours. "You know," Thomas said, softly, "your mother loved thunderstorms. She used to say they were just the sky putting on a show for us." "Really?" Sophia looked doubtful. "Really. She used to sing during storms to show she wasn't afraid." "What did she sing?" Thomas smiled at. "The memory. Something she made up. Let's see if I remember. Thunder boom and lightning flash, rain dance down and waters splash, nature's music fills the air, magical sounds are everywhere." He hummed the simple tune Sarah had created, feeling Sophia relax against him. By the time he finished, her breathing had deepened into sleep. Looking down at her, this perfect blend of himself and Sarah, Thomas made a silent promise not to repeat his father's mistakes. Unlike his father, he had been given a second chance to get his priorities right. And unlike Sarah had feared, he was ready to embrace it with his whole heart. The morning of the custody hearing dawned clear and crisp. Thomas stood in his kitchen, phone pressed to his ear, as he simultaneously attempted to pack 3 identical lunchboxes with the specific requirements each girl had insistently outlined the night before. Lily needed her sandwich cut diagonally with no crust. Charlotte required each food item in separate compartments to prevent contamination. Sophia needed extra snacks because she was always starving by afternoon. Yes, Richard, we're still on track for 10 o'clock. Thomas confirmed to his lawyer while carefully placing a note with a heart drawing, courtesy of his new assistant, who was surprisingly adept at such things, into Lily's lunch. The girls will be at school and Mrs. Hudson will pick them up afterward. I don't want them at the courthouse if Marcus decides to make a scene. Richard's voice came through the speaker. Good plan. I've sent a courier with the final affidavits for your signature. The evidence against Marcus is substantial, but be prepared. His lawyer will attack your suitability as a parent, focusing on your work schedule and lack of experience. I've adjusted my schedule permanently, Thomas replied, zipping up the final lunchbox. And I've learned more about parenting in these 2 weeks than I thought possible. It's not me you need to convince, Richard reminded him. Just be genuine with the judge. The girl's court-appointed guardian seems impressed with the changes you've made. After ending the call, Thomas found the girls in varying states of readiness for school. Charlotte was fully dressed, backpack organized, waiting by the door. Sophia was dressed but distracted, attempting to convince the housekeeper she needed to bring her new frog habitat to school for science class. Lily was still upstairs, reportedly having a fashion emergency that required Thomas's immediate attention. By the time he'd helped Lily select the right pink sweater, apparently there were subtle but critically important differences between the 3 pink sweaters she owned, convinced Sophia that the frog would be happier at home, and gotten everyone into the waiting car, Thomas was already mentally revising his corporate schedule. The board meeting would need to be pushed back, and the call with Tokyo would have to happen after the girls' bedtime. Good luck today, Daddy, Charlotte said as they pulled up to the school, her serious expression so adult-like it nearly broke his heart. Yeah, make sure we don't have to go back to Cousin Marcus, Sophia added with characteristic bluntness. Lily simply hugged him tight, whispering, I know you'll win because you're the best daddy ever. Their faith in him, still so new, yet already so complete, filled Thomas with determination. He wouldn't let them down. Mr. Blackwood, his driver interrupted gently. Ms. Winters called. She said it's urgent you come to the office before the hearing. Something about the Matsuda deal falling through. Thomas frowned. The Matsuda group had seemed fully committed at their rescheduled meeting last week. Their investment was crucial for BlackTech's expansion into Asian markets, which in turn was essential for maintaining the company's valuation before the IPO. Fine, he sighed. To the office first, but I need to be at the courthouse by 9:30. No exceptions. The moment Thomas walked into BlackTech's headquarters, he sensed something was wrong. The usual hum of productive energy was replaced with an atmosphere of tension. Employees avoided his gaze as he strode toward the executive floor. Thomas, thank God. Patricia met him at the elevator, her normally impeccable appearance showing signs of strain. The board called an emergency meeting. They're in the main conference room now. What's going on with Matsuda? Thomas asked, checking his watch. He had exactly 47 minutes before he needed to leave for court. Patricia hesitated. It's not just Matsuda. Please, you need to hear this from the board. The conference room fell silent as Thomas entered. 8 board members sat around the table, along with 2 people he hadn't expected. Marcus Wells and a woman he recognized as Marcus's attorney. What is this? Thomas demanded, automatically reaching for his phone to call security. Please sit down, Thomas, Harold Winters, the board chairman and Patricia's father, said gravely. We need to discuss some concerns that have been brought to our attention. Thomas remained standing. I have a court appearance in 40 minutes. Whatever this is, it needs to wait. That's precisely what we need to discuss, Harold continued. This custody battle is affecting company stability. The Matsuda Group has expressed reservations about investing in a company whose CEO is distracted. Distracted, Thomas repeated flatly. By my children. Marcus smirked slightly and Thomas, suddenly understood. This was the leverage Marcus had threatened. Not just a custody fight, but an attempt to force Thomas to choose between his daughters and his company. "Your newfound paternal interests are admirable," Harold said carefully. "But the timing, with our IPO approaching, my paternal interests aren't up for board discussion," Thomas interrupted coldly. "Now, if you'll excuse me, we're calling for a vote of no confidence," Patricia said abruptly. "As CFO, I've presented evidence that your recent decisions have endangered our fiscal stability and investor confidence." The betrayal hit Thomas like a physical blow. Patricia had been more than his CFO. She'd been his most trusted ally for a decade. Now she stood beside Marcus, her expression resolute. "You've missed critical meetings, postponed strategic decisions, and reprioritized the company's direction without proper consultation," she continued. "The board has the right to determine if your personal situation is compromising your judgment." Thomas looked around the table, noting which board members avoided his gaze and which met it directly. Harold produced a document. "We're prepared to offer very generous separation terms," he said. "You would remain as chairman, with all the financial benefits but none of the day-to-day responsibilities that might interfere with your new family obligations." "And if I refuse?" Thomas asked, though he already knew the answer. "Then we vote," Harold replied simply. "And based on preliminary discussions, I believe you would lose your position entirely." Thomas checked his watch again. 35 minutes until he needed to be in court. His phone buzzed. Richard, likely wondering where he was. In that moment, with perfect clarity, Thomas Blackwood knew exactly what his father had meant in his journal. He knew why Sarah had feared his ambition would override everything else. And he knew without question what mattered most. "You know what, go ahead and vote," he said calmly. "But first, I'd like to know how Mr. Wells gained access to confidential company information." He turned to Marcus. "And why you're so desperate to stop me from gaining custody that you'd resort to corporate sabotage." Marcus shrugged, but his confidence seemed to waver slightly under Thomas's steady gaze. "Just looking out for Black Tech's best interests, and the girls, of course." "Of course," Thomas echoed sarcastically. "Well, I need to leave for court now. But Patricia," he turned to his CFO, "you might want to explain to the board why the company's bank alerted me this morning about unusual wire transfers to offshore accounts. Accounts I believe are linked to Mr. Wells here." Patricia paled visibly. "I don't know what you're talking about, don't you? Because my security team has been tracking every communication between you two since Marcus first appeared at my penthouse." Thomas headed for the door. "The authorities have been notified. I suggest you all remain here until they arrive." As Thomas walked out, Harold called after him. "This company is your legacy, Thomas. Are you really willing to throw it all away?" Thomas didn't hesitate. "They're my legacy," he said simply. "The company is just a company." As the elevator doors closed, Thomas called Richard. "I'm on my way." "And Richard, tell the judge I'm ready to be a full-time father no matter what it costs." The custody hearing had gone perfectly, with Marcus conspicuously absent, likely dealing with the corporate fallout and police questioning. The judge had granted Thomas temporary full custody, pending final determination in 30 days. Thomas had left the courthouse feeling victorious, heading directly to his office to address the board crisis and prepare for the girls' arrival home from school. His phone rang at 3:42 p.m. The school day had ended at 3:15. "Mr. Blackwood?" The vice caller's voice was tense. "This is Principal Winters from Brookside Academy. I'm calling because, well, the girls weren't picked up, and when we tried reaching Mrs. Hudson, she said she wasn't scheduled to get them today." Thomas's blood ran cold. "What do you mean?" "Mrs. Hudson was supposed to pick them up. I confirmed with her this morning." "Sir, according to our records, You called at lunchtime to say their cousin would be picking them up instead. We had him listed as an authorized guardian from their previous school's transfer records. Marcus. It had to be. I never called, Thomas said, already signaling his driver. Check your security cameras immediately. This is an emergency. Thomas had given each girl a special watch with an emergency button and GPS tracker just days after they'd come into his life. He pulled up the tracking app as his car sped toward the school, but the signals showed nothing, either deactivated or destroyed. At the school, the security footage confirmed his worst fears. Marcus had picked up the girls at 3:20 p.m. The video showed Lily looking confused, Charlotte arguing with Marcus, and Sophia glancing around as if searching for Mrs. Hudson. But ultimately, all three had gotten into his car. He falsified authorization documents, the flustered principal explained, showing Thomas the forged form with his signature. And he knew all the security protocols. Because Patricia had access to the information Thomas had provided the school, including the password phrases and security questions. The betrayal cut even deeper now. Thomas called Richard, who immediately contacted the judge and police. An Amber Alert was issued, but Thomas couldn't just wait. He called David Chen. I need everything you have on Marcus. Properties, connections, anywhere he might take 3 children. David was silent for a moment. Check your email. One of my sources just sent something. Marcus booked a private plane from Teterboro Airport to Mexico City, departing at 5:30 p.m. Thomas checked his watch. 4:47 p.m. Call airport security. Tell them to hold that plane at all costs. The drive to Teterboro was the longest 30 minutes of Thomas's life. Every red light was agony, every delayed turn excruciating. Police were coordinating. But bureaucracy moved too slowly when 3 terrified little girls were being taken across international borders. Then, a miracle. Thomas's phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Daddy, it's Sophia. I hid my phone in my shoe when cousin Marcus took our watches. We're at the airport with the private planes. He says we're going on vacation, but Charlotte says he's lying. We're scared. Thomas texted back, I'm 5 minutes away, stay together. I'm coming for you. When Thomas's car screeched to a halt at Teterboro's private terminal, he could see a small jet on the tarmac, stairs deployed. A figure was herding 3 small shapes toward it. Security stopped him at the gate, but Thomas Blackwood, who had built an empire through sheer determination, was not about to be stopped now. He showed them the Amber Alert, Sophia's text, and when that didn't work fast enough, he simply vaulted over the security barrier and ran. Stop that plane, he shouted to anyone who would listen. Those are my daughters. Across the tarmac, 3 identical heads turned at the sound of his voice. Daddy! The shout came in perfect unison, 3 voices blending into one desperate cry. Thomas sprinted across the tarmac, his designer shoes pounding against concrete as airport security shouted. Behind him, ahead, Marcus grabbed Sophia's arm, yanking her toward the plane stairs while attempting to herd Lily and Charlotte forward. But at the sound of Thomas's voice, the girls had frozen, and Charlotte was now actively pulling away. Get in the plane! Marcus shouted, his face contorted with desperation. A second man, the pilot Thomas assumed, emerged from the aircraft looking alarmed at the commotion. Thomas was still 50 yards away when Charlotte broke free. With a determination that belied her 7 years, she grabbed Lily's hand and pulled, creating enough momentum that Marcus couldn't hold them all. Sophia seized the opportunity to stomp hard on Marcus's foot, causing him to release her with a curse. And then they were running. 3 identical little girls in matching school uniforms racing toward Thomas with everything they had. The security guards had caught up now, but seeing the situation, they bypassed Thomas and headed for Marcus instead. The pilot, wanting no part of whatever was happening, retreated into the plane and closed the door. Thomas dropped to his knees as the girls reached him, 3 small bodies colliding with his in a tangle of arms and tears. He wrapped them in a fierce embrace, his heart hammering so hard he thought it might burst. "You came for us," Sophia sobbed, her usual bravado completely abandoned. "I was so scared," Lily whispered, her face buried against his shoulder. Charlotte, ever practical, even in crisis, pulled back slightly to look at him. "I told them you would find us. I calculated the drive time from your office." A laugh that was half-sob escaped Thomas. "Of course you did." Police cars converged on the scene, lights flashing. Marcus was already in handcuffs, the security guards restraining him until officers could take over. His face was a mask of fury and defeat as he watched Thomas with the girls. "You've ruined everything," he shouted as police approached. "This isn't over, Blackwood." But Thomas wasn't listening. His entire world had narrowed to the 3 little girls clinging to him, safe and whole. "Are you hurt?" he asked, checking each of them for injuries. "Did he hurt you?" "He grabbed my arm really hard," Sophia said, showing a red mark that was already darkening to a bruise. "And he took our special watches and phones, but I hid mine in my sock when he wasn't looking." "Smart girl," Thomas praised, kissing her forehead. "He said we were going on vacation," Lily explained, her voice small, "but he was acting weird and scary." "He said you didn't really want us," Charlotte added quietly, "that you were just pretending because of your company." Thomas felt a surge of anger unlike anything he'd ever experienced. The thought of Marcus manipulating his daughter's fears and insecurities made him want to break through the police barrier and confront the man himself. Instead, he gathered the girls closer. "That's not true. Not even a little bit. You 3 are the most important people in my entire world." "More important than Black Tech?" Charlotte asked skeptically. "Black Tech is just a company," Thomas said firmly. "You are my family, my real legacy." Something in his voice must have convinced them, because all 3 girls relaxed against him. For the first time since he'd met them, they called him Daddy, without hesitation or uncertainty. A unanimous chorus of trust that healed something broken inside him. As police officers approached to take statements, Thomas stood, lifting Lily into his arms while keeping his other hand firmly clasped in Sophia's. Charlotte, always independent, stayed pressed against his side. "Mr. Blackwood," one officer began, "we'll need to get statements from the girls, but we can do that at the station where they'll be more comfortable." Thomas nodded. "Thank you. And the man who helped him? There must have been someone inside my company providing information." "We've already detained a Patricia Winters at your corporate headquarters," the officer confirmed. "She's being questioned about her involvement." The betrayal still stung, but standing there with his daughters safe beside him, Thomas found he couldn't summon much concern for corporate politics or former allies. Those priorities belonged to a different man, the one who had stood alone in his penthouse just weeks ago, surrounded by success but empty inside. That man was gone. In his place stood a father, holding his world in his arms. "The board is split," Richard explained, spreading documents across Thomas's home office desk. "Harold and 3 others want you out completely. 4 support you remaining as CEO. Patricia's arrest has created significant turmoil." Thomas nodded, gazing through the open door to where the girls were building an elaborate fort in the living room. 2 weeks had passed since the abduction attempt. Marcus remained in custody, denied bail due to flight risk. Patricia faced corporate espionage charges, having apparently sold company secrets to finance Marcus's escape plan in exchange for a cut of whatever he'd planned to extort from Thomas. "What are my options?" Thomas asked, returning his attention to his lawyer. Richard leaned back. "You could fight. You've got enough voting power combined with your allies on the board to maintain control. But it would be messy, time-consuming, and potentially damaging to the company's valuation." "And the other option?" "Restructure. Step down as CEO, but remain as chairman. Focus on long-term strategy rather than day-to-day operations. It's actually not uncommon for founders to make this transition before an IPO. Thomas considered this. For 15 years, Black Tech had been his life, his identity wrapped up in the company he'd built from nothing. The prospect of stepping back should have been painful, but surprisingly it wasn't. Would I still have significant input on company direction? Absolutely. As chairman and majority shareholder, you'd maintain considerable influence without the daily operational responsibilities. A crash from the living room followed by Sophia's "It wasn't me," and Lily's giggling interrupted them. Thomas smiled. Draw up the restructuring papers, he decided. I'll present the plan to the board myself. The following Monday, Thomas stood before Black Tech's board. Gone was the ruthless CEO who would sacrifice anything for corporate success. In his place stood a man who had discovered something far more valuable than stock options or market position. For 15 years, I've defined success by this company's growth, Thomas began. I believed building an empire was my purpose, my legacy. I was wrong. He outlined his restructuring plan. He would transition to executive chairman, focusing on strategic vision and major partnerships. The COO, James Chen, would be promoted to CEO, handling daily operations and reporting to the board. The transition would be completed before the IPO, providing stability for investors. This isn't a concession, Thomas concluded. It's an evolution. Black Tech deserves leadership that can be fully present. My daughters deserve a father who is fully present too. This restructuring honors both commitments. The vote passed unanimously. That afternoon, Thomas sat in a different meeting room, facing Judge Harriman for the final custody hearing. Marcus's attorney had withdrawn from the case after his client's arrest, and with overwhelming evidence of Marcus's unfitness, the proceedings were largely a formality. Mr. Blackwood, Judge Harriman peered over her glasses. Your commitment to these children is commendable, especially given how suddenly they entered your life. However, I must ask, how will you balance your responsibilities as a high-profile executive with the demands of raising 3 young children as a single parent? Thomas smiled. As of this morning, I've restructured my position to focus exclusively on long-term strategy, with no day-to-day operational responsibilities. My primary job now is being a father. The judge looked surprised, then pleased. And the girls' education? Their emotional well-being? They're enrolled in Brookside Academy, where Charlotte is already participating in the advanced science program. Lily has started piano lessons and Sophia joined a youth soccer league. They also see Dr. Morgan, a child psychologist, once a week to help process all the changes in their lives. Judge Harriman nodded approvingly. And your home situation? We've moved from my penthouse to a brownstone with a yard closer to their school. I've hired a full-time housekeeper who's experienced with children, but I handle morning routines and bedtimes myself. My schedule is arranged, so I'm home for dinner every night. After a few more questions, the judge smiled warmly. Mr. Blackwood, it's rare to see someone reorganize their entire life so thoroughly for the benefit of children they didn't know existed just months ago. I'm granting you full legal and physical custody of Lily, Charlotte, and Sophia Blackwood. Thomas blinked. At the surname change, the judge noticed his surprise. The petition for name change was included in your lawyer's filings. Did you not want— No, Thomas said quickly. I just didn't expect it to happen so quickly. Judge Harriman's eyes softened. Sometimes families come together in unexpected ways, Mr. Blackwood. But when they do, it's important to make it official for everyone's sense of belonging. As Thomas left the courthouse, legal documents in hand, 3 identical Blackwood girls waited with Mrs. Hudson on the steps. Their faces lit up as they spotted him. Well? Charlotte demanded. Practical as always. Thomas grinned. It's official. We're a family. 1 year later, the Blackwood brownstone buzzed with excitement. Balloons and streamers in pink, blue, and yellow, each girl's signature color, decorated the backyard where an 8th birthday celebration was underway. Thomas stood by the grill, watching his daughters with quiet amazement. In just over a year, they had transformed from cautious, traumatized children into confident, thriving individuals. And they had transformed him just as profoundly. Lily sat at the new outdoor piano pavilion Thomas had built for her, entertaining several elderly neighbors with a piece she'd composed herself. Her gentle nature had blossomed into artistic talent that surprised everyone but Thomas, who recognized Sarah's creativity in every note. Nearby, Charlotte explained her science fair project, which had won regional championships, to Thomas's former COO, now Black Tech CEO. Her analytical mind had only sharpened with encouragement and resources, earning her a special mentorship with a leading female scientist through the Sarah Winters Foundation. The foundation had been Thomas's way of honoring Sarah's memory, providing support to single parents and educational opportunities for their children. What began as a personal project had grown into one of the country's most impactful family support organizations. Sophia, ever in motion, led a chaotic game of tag through the yard, her competitive spirit and natural athleticism making her a fearless leader among her peers. Her soccer team had made it to the city championships, with Thomas attending every game, cheering just as loudly for losses as for wins. As the party wound down and guests departed, Thomas gathered the girls for their special birthday gift. He presented each with a small velvet box containing a locket, each in their signature color, each containing a photograph of Sarah. "So we can keep Mommy with us always," Lily whispered, carefully examining the delicate jewelry. "And so you always know where you came from," Thomas added softly. Later that evening, the four Blackwoods sat in the library, looking through photo albums Mrs. Hudson had preserved from Eleanor's home. Thomas had added new sections filled with their first year together, school events, holidays, everyday moments that seemed mundane but were precious beyond measure. "Daddy?" Sophia asked, curled against his side. "Are you sad you don't run Black Tech anymore?" Thomas smiled, looking at the three faces that had given his life true purpose. "Not even a little bit." "Good." Charlotte nodded approvingly. "Because you're much better at being a dad than being a CEO." "Is that so?" Thomas laughed. "Definitely," Lily agreed, her head resting on his shoulder. "Grandma was right." "About what?" "She told us the man with roses would have a heart big enough for all three of us. And she was right." In that moment, Thomas Blackwood, once defined by the empire he'd built, knew with absolute certainty that his real legacy was the love in this room. 3 unexpected daughters had filled the emptiness in his heart, creating a family he never knew he wanted, but now couldn't imagine living without. Sarah had been right all along about what truly mattered. He just wished she could see what beautiful lives they'd created together.